So, just to start, I guess, at the beginning.
Okay.
You were born in,
Huntington, West Virginia.
and you lived there for
A matter of months.
months.
Yeah, I was still an infant when we moved to the Chicago area.
So, your dad's job while you were in,
He was selling mining machinery, traveling for the, it was then called Sullivan Manufacturing Company. And so he was out on the road traveling West Virginia and eastern Kentucky, going from place to place. He had some interesting experiences that are in his memoirs.
okay, so after a few months, then he was transferred? Or
He was transferred to the Chicago office.
to do the same?
Yeah, he at some point, no, he wasn't traveling in that area, of course. I think that must have been when he was changed into export sales, and he started to work with other companies, other countries.
And then, okay, so in a few months you moved from
From
West
West Virginia
Virginia
to
to
the Chicago area.
Long Beach.
No,
No?
not to Long Beach, not for a long time.
Okay.
We moved up here to the Chicago area. The first place we lived was LaGrange.
LaGrange, okay.
And then this was, you know, I ushered in the Depression, because I was born in the month that the Depression
Right.
started. That was the
Gave you
month of
30
Depression.
days to,
So
28 days.
we lived in LaGrange for a while. I have no idea how long, but my dad's working hours were cut back, and you know, money was scarce. So we moved from there to, I think, Brookfield, and then we moved from there to an apartment in Westchester. So by the time I was about 5, I had already lived in 4 different places.
Okay. You don't remember those places?
I
right?
do have some early memories of Chicago. One of them must have been before we moved to the apartment, because I have a memory of my dad having to go down to put coal in the stoker for the furnace, and I think we had a chute that they delivered the coal through a chute, and I believe they brought ice for an ice box. And I have a kind of memory of being out in the yard with trees. And recently, when I went to Brookfield, I went there to the zoo when they had the Lego animals there, and the houses looked so familiar to me. And my sister said, yes, that's typical of Brookfield. So I think I must have some memory of that. I remember the apartment building, because we were on the 3rd floor. There was a big open field behind us. There was a railroad track that ran close by, and my mother was so afraid that I would get over to the railroad track and there would be hobos there and I might be assaulted. But I used to go out and wander in that field, and my dad had a worm farm. We raised earthworms to use as fishing bait.
So at that time, the utilities at the house you had coal for heat?
Well, at least at some point, I'm not sure which house, probably the Brookfield house. We wouldn't have had it in the apartments, and I'm sure I don't remember LaGrange, because I was just really tiny then. I think I may have started going to school there, but I don't think I went to kindergarten. So I think I kind of vaguely remember getting onto a school bus, and that must have been in Westchester.
Did you have a car at that time?
Well, my family had a car, yeah.
That would have been in the early 1930s, right?
Well, I said they had a car, I'm not sure. My dad probably took the subway to work.
Well, when he was traveling in West Virginia, he must have had a car.
No, I don't think so. He traveled by train and foot.
Wow. Okay, so now you're in Westchester and about 5 years old. And he's more at home. And your mom was always at home.
Well, in the mountains, he'd be gone for days.
Right, but now in Chicago area, he basically was working in the area.
Yeah, think so. Eventually, I don't know at what point, he started doing a lot of overseas travel. But I don't know when that, well, I do know he was in Europe in the late 1930s. He brought back coins, and I think Colin has all of those coins. And among them were some that were from the Third Reich, 1939, I think, coins. There were coins from a lot of different countries.
Okay, so from there, you moved to, this is 39 or so, or, no, you're only 5, so like 35?
When I was in second grade, first or second grade, so I would have been 6 or 7, he was on a trip. He was gone for a year, traveling in South America. We only got home once during that whole year. And we went to stay with my grandparents in Eureka, Kansas.
So that was a physical move or just a?
Oh, a physical move, yeah. We lived with my grandparents. My mother and my sister and I lived with my grandparents for a year, and I went to school there.
Okay. Do you remember much of Kansas?
Oh yeah, I remember a lot. It was hot and dry, and the ground would crack, and there was an ice house a couple blocks away, and we could go down and sit outside that ice house and get a little bit of cool air when they'd open the doors.
Air conditioning.
And that was our air conditioning. My grandparents had a house that had a sleeping porch upstairs. They had an upstairs porch, and they had a bunch of beds out on that porch. And so because it was so hot, that's where we would sleep. And they had a closet that ran from one room to the other all the way through, and we thought that was great to be up there. And they had some McGuffey readers. That was kind of a classic in those days.
Okay.
For early elementary school learning. We had a dog. We had gotten the dog here in Chicago. We got the dog at Orphans of the Storm. I was amazed when I came back here now and found out that Orphans of the Storm is still there and still operating. Mm-hmm. This dog was some kind of a big collie breed, I think, and kind of a rambunctious dog.
You were living with her parents?
Yes.
Any other family there, Tim?
Oh, all the Dunham family were from Kansas, so there were aunts and uncles, particularly not in that city, but there were some in Emporia, and we used to go to visit them, and I had cousins there.
Well, your dad was one of, like, 10?
He was one of 12, but not all of them lived. There was one set of twins in the family, but one of them was stillborn. And some of them I never met. Uncles and aunts I never met, and cousins I never met. My dad and his siblings started a round robin letter, and they would write a letter and put it in the envelope. It would go on to the next person. They would add their letter to the envelope, and then so on until they had one from every one of the 12, however many were left, let's say 9. And then when you came back around to you where you started, you'd take your old one out and write a new one and put it in. So they did that for years and years and years. And after they were gone, one of my cousins had us start that at our age. And we did that for a little while, but it never caught on like it did with the siblings because so many of us really didn't know
Do you
each other.
know if the final copy of that letter exists anywhere?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, so you're there for a year,
Yes.
and then what was the next?
Then we moved to New York City. We lived in Jackson Heights. My dad traveled by subway to Manhattan and worked in the Empire State Building. And he was still traveling at that time.
international.
So that must have been about 1939, so that's probably when he was on the European circuit.
And you stayed there for?
At least a year, maybe a little longer.
So
I know I finished third grade there, and I think I started fourth grade there.
Okay, so this is your second school you've gone to? Or third? Schools that you've gone to
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, I think I started in one
in Chicago?
up here in Chicago, and then I went to one in Kansas, and then I went to the one in New York. And I used to walk to school several blocks. I must have been about 9. And I think I was allowed to walk to the movie theater, and I went out and I would roller skate on the sidewalks there. Can you imagine any child doing that these days?
No, they've changed since the 50s, basically. It was the start of you can't let kids do stuff.
I remember there was a flautist would come around and play the flute, and my mother felt so sorry for him because in the winter he was playing, and of course he had to have no fingers in his gloves to be able to play the flute, and she would feel so sorry. And they sent me to Brownie camp. I was in Brownies in those days. They sent me to Brownie camp in the Poconos for a week or 2, I don't know how long.
Oh, from New York you went in the summer?
Just once.
Okay. And you lived in New York for?
I think it must have been about a year and a half.
So it was an apartment in Manhattan?
Not in Manhattan, in Queens,
Wait,
in Jackson Heights. We were in an apartment. We had a first floor apartment.
She said her father went into Manhattan to work.
We left there just when they were about to start open the New York World's Fair. We had been in the Chicago area when the World's Fair was going on here, and we had a lot of relatives who came to visit us to go to the fair, and we were not far from where the New York World's Fair was held. That was in Flushing, and we moved just before it opened, so the relatives didn't get to come and visit us there. So I think that was 1939 that World's
Yeah, I
Fair
don't
was
remember that one. The Chicago was like 33 or 34, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so you moved from New York to?
That's when we went to northern Indiana, to Long Beach, which is outside of Michigan City.
Okay.
And that was child's heaven compared to New York, because instead of going out and roller skating on sidewalks, this was a beautiful wooded area. I rode a bike to school. We were in a building that was a Frank Lloyd Wright building, the school, which is still there. It's no longer used as a school, but it's still there. We were 3 dunes over from the lake. My mother would let me go over and swim by myself in the lake. I can't imagine any parent doing that even back then, but she did.
Is that just based that there were other people there?
Not necessarily.
So you might swim by yourself?
I might, yeah. And it was, there were blueberries that grew wild, and there was lupin that grew wild. I remember when we hadn't been there very long, I went out one time and I was picking lupin because it was such a beautiful flower. And I had my hands full, and I'd see more, and I would pick more and pick more and pick more until I couldn't hold it. Someone came along and said something to me about it, just jokingly.
So you lived there from age 9?
Well, it must have been, I know I was 11 when we left, but my dad left to go to South Africa. He was sent down there on a troubleshooting mission. And I must have been probably in the 5th grade when he went down there. And he was just supposed to be there a short time, but the company decided to fire the head of that manufacturing plant and asked my dad to stay. So 9 months later, my mother had to pack up the household and move us to Johannesburg to join my dad. We left in February. We had to wait a long time for passage. We went on a freighter. You couldn't get a passenger ship to Africa at that time. The war was going on, but America had not yet. It was 1941, so it was before Pearl Harbor. But the war was going on, and there were German U-boats out, probably even around the United States. So we went to, we were all traveling on one passport at that time. And when we finally got passage on a ship, we went over to the shipyard, and we got on board, and we were sitting and eating lunch. I remember specifically I was eating pea soup. And they came around to check the passports, and they said, "Your passport is not in order. You can't travel on this," because it had to be revalidated, which they don't do anymore, but they did then during the war. And so they took us off the ship, and the ship couldn't stay in dock. The place was needed for other ships, I guess.
This was in,
So
what city were you in this? Port?
this was New York,
New York? Okay, so you went from Chicago to New York
to
by
catch
tra-
the ship, yeah.
by train or?
Oh, I don't remember the trip from Chicago to New York. Oh, actually, it would have been from Indiana to New York. I don't
Yeah,
remember
sorry.
how we got there.
Okay.
I do know that while my dad was traveling in South America, my mother bought a car. And in those days, my mother was not as adventurous as she was later in life. So when my dad got back and found out she had bought a car, he was just amazed. It was a Hudson Terraplane.
Yeah, sorry.
No, they
Heard
don't
of
make them
Hudson,
anymore.
but, yeah.
Anyway, they took us off the ship, and the captain sailed without us. But he didn't want to leave us behind. So he took the passengers on a tour, and they sailed around New York Harbor or wherever. And when they finally got our passport straightened out by phoning Washington, they took us back down to the docks, and they put us on a tugboat. And the tugboat went out to where the ship was, and they put a plank across between the tugboat and the ship, and we boarded the ship by walking the plank.
That's cool.
Well, they must have been able to resolve the passport within a day.
Yeah, it was the same day. It didn't take a whole long time.
So,
So we sailed, and then it was February, and we were crossing the North Atlantic, and the very first day we got into a terrible storm, and we all got seasick.
So what were your accommodations like in this freight?
Well, they had made some cabins, and we were all three in one cabin. I know I was in an upper bunk. I think it was just a two bed bunk, so there must have been another bed. I'm pretty sure our mother was in the same cabin with us. They had cabins for, I suppose you'd say, first class passengers, and then they had steerage. No, I'm wrong. That's on the way back.
So
There were about 50 passengers, I think.
this would have been like a diesel powered or coal powered ship, not a sail
I have
ship?
no idea what kind of power.
It didn't have sails.
No,
and you went from New York to where exactly? What was the next port? Because you didn't go direct to South Africa.
we went to Cape Town.
Direct?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you went to South America and then across.
No,
on the way
we
back.
went direct
I
to
think
Cape
that was the
Town.
way back trip.
Okay. So you got down to South Africa around, if it was February, it was 3 months or a month or?
I don't know how long the trip was. I just really don't know.
Okay.
They did a nice job of keeping us comfortable and keeping us entertained, and it was a pleasant voyage once we got out of that storm. At least for a kid my age.
Okay. So then you arrived in South.
We arrived in Cape Town. Our dad had driven down to pick us up. And it's a long way from Johannesburg to Cape Town. And it's pretty barren country much of the way. And at one point I think he turned a around a curve, and there was dust, and he was blinded, and anyway, he wrecked the car. So when he got there, we had no car.
But you were able to get the car there.
We came to Johannesburg by train, but we were in Cape Town for, I think, a couple of weeks, and so we had a chance to do some sightseeing in Cape Town. It's a beautiful city, of course, flowers, and I still have vivid memories of the day we landed. The brilliance of the flowers, the strangeness of all these people speaking a language I couldn't understand, all these black faces. And of course, a new currency to learn, and it was a new experience.
That was the first time you'd seen black.
Oh, not the first time I'd ever seen blacks, but having many more blacks than white people was just very strange, and it's just such a different culture there.
So how old were you at this time when you arrived in
11.
Cape Town? 11.
So now you've gotten to Johannesburg and you've got a house.
We didn't have a house. We stayed at a hotel. It had little individual buildings that were like the ones that the native population used. They're round and built out of adobe, we would call it. They call them rondavels, with a thatched roof, and we stayed there for a while.
Okay, so in your note here, you have heat and air conditioning. You didn't, at that time, you didn't have air conditioning.
We didn't have air conditioning the whole time we were there. It's a very temperate climate.
Okay. I guess I'm confused because here you have heat and air conditioning under a house, then servants.
Well, we did move into a house eventually. We stayed in that little hotel for a while until we got a house.
Okay.
And then we rented a house, and it had a fish pond, and it came with an Airedale.
You came with an air.
It had, the only heat was coal burning fireplaces and no air conditioning, because it doesn't get that hot in the summer there. It doesn't get terribly cold, but they do use fireplaces for heat. We had servants.
Yeah, and cooking was, how did they cook? Did you have a stove?
We had a native cook who did all our meals. I don't know anything about how they did them. I don't know.
Okay, so now you've been there and you're going to school?
Yes, they put us in school. They put us in a private school, St. Andrews. And of course, it's all uniforms. So they wanted my sister and me to be in the same school. And she's older, so she was already in high school. She had been skipped 2 grades in school, so she was ahead of herself in school.
And she
I
was
was
about a year older, right?
She's 3.5 years older than me. So she had been about 5 years ahead of me in school. And I was in 6th grade when we left the States. So my parents wanted us both to be in the same school, so they wanted me to go to the school she was going to, which was a high school. So they told me to, when they asked me my age, to say I'm almost 12. So I did, and they put me in high school. So I went into the first year of high school, which isn't quite as bad as it sounds, because they have a 5-year high school. So it was like putting me into the 8th grade, really. But nevertheless, I'm in a strange school, very different type of school, and I'm 2 years ahead of anybody in my class. I'm 2 years younger than anybody else.
And they were speaking British English?
Yeah.
Did you adjust to that real well, or?
It was interesting sometimes. One of the things they would do is that the teacher would dictate something and we were supposed to write it out. And this was supposed to teach us punctuation, grammar, I guess. And one day she was dictating something and she said something about a skittle. I had no idea what a skittle was. So I wrote down Skiddle. And what she really had said was squirrel in British English. The other thing is that I think I told you this the other night, that they were required to memorize and recite 25 lines of either poetry or prose every week. And so I'd been there like a week, and she said to me, recite. And they were all learning Tennyson and Wordsworth and Shakespeare and all that. So I had learned a lot of nonsense stuff. So I recited something from James Whitcomb Riley, which I'm sure they never heard of him. And I'm sure they were horrified at what I recited.
Recite as much as you remember.
They all climbed up on a high board fence, 9 little goblins with green glass eyes. 9 little goblins that had no sense and couldn't tell coppers from cold mince pies. They all climbed up on the fence and sat, and I asked them what they were staring at. And the first one said, as he scratched his head with a queer little arm that reached out of his ear and rasped its claws in its hair so red, "This is what this little arm is for." And he scratched and stared, and the next one said, "How on earth do you scratch your head?"
That is funny. Imagine. Kids like,
So you're in 8th grade or high school?
I'm in the first year of high school.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we were at St. Andrews for a short period of time. And then my sister said something that they considered to be disparaging about the royal family.
Oh.
And they called my parents into the principal's office, or whatever they give that title to. I don't know that they use principal. Headmistress, I think. And they said she couldn't stay at the school anymore, but I could.
At that time, who was on the throne?
That would have been George.
George, yeah.
60. So my parents said no, they would not leave me there if my sister couldn't be there. So they took us out of that school, and they put us into one of the public schools, Parktown Girls High School. And we both went to that school. I was still in the first year of high school at that point.
And your dad was traveling around South Africa?
Yeah, he traveled, not just South Africa, he traveled all of Southern Africa. It was then Rhodesia. That would now be Zimbabwe, Zaire.
And he was going to diamond mines, is that it?
He went to coal mines and copper mines and diamond mines and gold mines. He took me underground, not then, later on, when I came back to visit after I was in college. He took me underground in a coal mine, wearing a miner's helmet. And he also took my mother and me underground in a diamond mine. You couldn't go underground in the gold mines. They were so deep that only the workers went down in those mines. And I never was anywhere near the copper mines. They were farther north.
And at this time, the British are at war, and the U.S. was not.
That's correct. South Africa was at war because they were still part of the British Empire. So they were at war.
And there was some friction, right, between the British and the fact that America wasn't
Yes.
participating in their
Yes.
in the war.
Most of my schoolmates didn't like me at all.
Sorry.
Well, just
Yeah,
part of what I,
grew up.
part of
your
what's made me
experiences.
what I am today.
Yes. So you've now switched to another school, which has got to be like your 6th or 7th.
Well, let's see, there was 4 by the time I left Chicago, then there was Kansas, then there was New York, then there was Northern Indiana, then there was the first high school and the second high school. So I'm up to the 9th.
Did you ever get better at making friends with people after changing so often?
You know, I always had friends, but um, when I was in South Africa, it was just a very few. Well, I had other friends in South Africa. There was quite a large American community there. And so I had a lot of friends through that. And we used to have a busy social life. We had dances, and we had, a lot of the homes have swimming pools and tennis courts. And so I had really a busy social life. It's just, in school, there were a lot of people who really didn't like me.
Yeah. I guess I didn't realize that there were that many Americans in South Africa at that time.
Yeah, there were, I don't know how big, but it was a pretty big, the men used to get together and play either softball or baseball, I'm not sure which. And my mother always, my dad's name was Cecil, and she never liked that name. And when we moved down there, they pronounced it Cecil. She liked that a little better. But she always called him Sweetheart. So he would be out on the field and he would catch the ball, and the men would say, "Good catch, Sweetheart."
So we're still in like 1939, 1940 era, right?
Well, it was 1941 when
Oh.
we went down there.
Okay, so 41.
We were there from 41 to 45.
Oh, I didn't realize you were there that long. I thought you moved back.
Well, I was there from 41 to 45. In 1945, we had an opportunity, the war is still going on, but we had an opportunity to come back to the States, and my parents decided to bring my sister and me back to the States and leave us here. I was 15 then, so then we made the trip back.
All four of you?
Yeah.
And that was where you went from South Africa to South America to New York?
Yeah, we were on a, again, it was not really a passenger ship. It was a boat that had been used to carry freight up and down the Rio de la Plata in Argentina. And it was commandeered for ocean travel and made the trip down to South Africa. And it was so badly damaged that it was put into dry dock for 9 months for repairs, and then we came back on it.
Wow.
And that was when they had cabins for the, I guess I would say, high-paying passengers, and they had steerage for other people who were, I don't know, indigent or whatever, but anyway. And one of those passengers, one time on the trip, decided he wanted to commit suicide, and he jumped overboard. And once he was in the water, then he started yelling for help. So they turned the ship around and went back and got him. He was a steerage passenger.
Just let me back up just a little bit. When your dad was in South Africa, he had some government clearances for special travel, from what I remember.
I guess I didn't really remember that, but he must have. I don't know.
Yeah, I remember being told that. So.
It's quite possible. We had 3 servants. We had a gardener, a houseboy, and a woman who was the cook and did the ironing and laundry and things like that.
Okay, so now you're coming home and you get back and you go to Chicago area again.
Yeah, our trip back was kind of interesting too, because we split the passports. Then we were 2 and 2, but because it was wartime, there were priorities, and we spent 2 weeks in Buenos Aires, and then we flew to Santiago, Chile, and then we spent the night, and we flew to Lima, Peru, and we spent the night, and then we flew to Panama City, where we got bumped and lost our spot on the planes. We were supposed to fly to New Orleans. No, I think we were supposed to fly to Miami.
Yeah.
But we were there a week, and my mother had packed 1 suitcase that had clothes for all 4 of us. But our luggage was all matched luggage, and my dad sent on the wrong thing. So I was there for a week with only the clothes that I had on my back, which my mother washed every night, and I slept in my dad's undershirts. And then we got a flight out, and that's when we went to New Orleans.
So I seem to remember a story about a rickety old airplane that you flew in over the Andes.
Well, we flew in 21 passenger planes. All those jumps, those puddle jumps through South America were in small 21 passenger planes. And we flew over the Andes in one of those, and they didn't tell us anything about taking oxygen. So I remember not feeling good.
They had oxygen just available for the passengers?
I don't know, they never said anything about it.
Okay.
And when we were in Lima, Peru, my dad knew people all over South America because of that year that he had spent down there. So he knew someone there and who had sons, I guess, and the two young men took my sister and me out dancing.
Okay, so now you've gotten from there to New Orleans.
And we took a train, and that was an experience too, because transportation was so difficult. And I remember that getting on the train, there was this huge crowd, and it was like the Black Fridays here, where people were pushing so hard and trampling each other, and it was really difficult. It was not a good trip. But
That
we
was
came to Chicago
pushing and shoving just because it
because
first on.
because they
Yeah.
weren't sure they were going to get a seat.
Yeah. Okay. That's got to be a fairly long train ride then too, from New Orleans to Chicago.
Yeah,
Steam engine?
I didn't look at see what the engine was. I will tell you that on our train ride from Cape Town to Johannesburg, we rode what they considered to be their best train. It's called the Blue Train, and I'm sure it was coal-fired. We slept with the windows open, and I ended up in the morning with cinders on my pillow.
Okay, so now you've reached Chicago, the four of you.
Yeah, we stayed in. Is there a Ritz-Carlton hotel in Chicago?
Yeah.
That's where we stayed.
Okay.
And it was a mess. I mean, it was not clean. It was, it was wartime, and this was early 1945, and life was different then.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole time. Thing is different.
So we stayed there for a while.
So 1945, you were about 15 or 16?
I was 15.
So you stayed, all four of you stayed there for a while?
We were there, I don't know how long.
In the water tower place.
I don't know how long we were there. But they put us into school. They put me into a school here in Lake Forest that was called Ferry Hall. It was a boarding school for girls. At this point, since I was 11, I'd only been in girls' schools. I'd never been in a co-ed school after I was 11. So they put me in Ferry Hall. They put me into the senior year of high school. And my sister started at Northwestern.
But then your parents had gone back to South
Then they
Africa.
went back to Johannesburg. I never lived with them again.
And that's at 16 or whatever, that's 15.
I was 15.
That's how it was.
Yeah. So you probably didn't see your sister a whole lot.
I didn't see her, no. Her boyfriend from South Africa had moved back to the States too, and she was really busy. And he was at MIT, which is, he wasn't nearby, but nevertheless, she was obsessed with her boyfriend, and then she eventually did marry him. And that's the one that didn't work out well, and she divorced him. But my only problem when I was at Ferry Hall was that when the school would close down, like for Christmas break or spring break, the only place I could have gone was to my grandparents, and that wasn't very practical. So I couldn't stay at the school, but I always had friends there who would invite me to come and stay at their houses. And I still, well, one of them recently passed away, but I still was in touch with them. I'm still in touch with one of them now, and we had a really good, and they were really good to me. The parents of one of them had wanted to become my guardians, but my parents wouldn't allow it.
Okay, so your sister must be about going to graduate from Northwestern.
Yes, she graduated from Northwestern and married the boyfriend from South Africa.
Durham.
There was, oh, my mother came home. I guess they both came for her wedding maybe, but my mother stayed for the summer. Oh, it was when we got back from Africa. I went to high school in Eureka, Kansas for a while too. When we first came back from South Africa, before they put me into Ferry Hall, I went to school for a while in the high school in Eureka. I even went to the senior prom there.
Okay, so
You would have been a fresh, no.
I was a senior there.
You were a senior.
okay, so you're there in Kansas, in Lila's in.
No, I don't know where Lila was then, but that was just for a short time. And then she went to
Just
Northwestern.
to
I
finish
went
the
to-
year out.
I don't know if she was with us that summer or not. I don't remember. I don't remember her being there.
I've been in Massachusetts with her boyfriend.
It could be.
Well, she would have already been, if you're a senior, she would have already been into college.
Yeah, because she had been put ahead 2 years, but then later I was put ahead 2 years. So when we came back from South Africa, I was put into senior year of high school, and she was put into, I think, junior year of Northwestern. By that time, she was only 2 years ahead of me in college,
Yeah, okay.
in school.
So, your mom and dad were with you in Kansas, or did they?
I don't remember my dad being there, just,
Your mom?
I went back to Kansas for a little while the summer after I graduated from high school, just for the summer, and then started to Purdue.
So, okay, I thought you graduated from high school on, that school on Lake Forest, no?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
After I graduated, before I started to Purdue, I spent the summer in Kansas,
Okay,
and my mother was there. She was still here when I actually started into Purdue. She left right after I actually got into
Purdue.
school.
Yeah, got in a dorm.
Yeah,
Okay.
so by now I'm 16.
16, yeah.
That was an eventful 16 years.
I've had what I would say is an eventful life.
You met our father then.
At Purdue, I think the very first week of classes. I was planning to be a chemical engineer, so I had enrolled in the first year of engineering, and he was, I think he was at that time classified as a sophomore, because he had been in college before he went into the Army. But we were taking a surveying class. We would go out and do field trips doing surveying, and we were in the same surveying group. That's where I met him.
And he had just come back from being in Europe, right? For
Yes.
World War II.
Yes.
Okay, So you started in chemical engineering and then you got sick.
I got sick, starting my sophomore year. I had mononucleosis and I was extremely weak, and when I saw the campus doctor, she ordered me to get out of the school and go home. Among other things, it's infectious, and so she told me I had to go home, and I had no place to go. So I went to the home of one of my friends that had taken me in at Christmas in the past, and I just showed up at their house and I said, I'm sick, and they took me in and took care of me. I was there for 2 weeks, then I went back, but I had to drop a lot of classes, and so now I'm behind in my program, although I'd been ahead because they had put me into some advanced classes when I started. But anyway, your dad said to me, you don't need to finish in engineering because I don't want my wife working. And so I changed majors to science instead of engineering.
So you graduated with a science degree?
Yeah.
Not an engineering degree?
And that mattered. How?
Who knows? Okay, so you graduated and got married after graduation?
Yeah, graduated in June, got married early July,
And what year is that?
1950.
So then, you moved into a home and.
We moved into an apartment in Indianapolis.
Okay.
Your dad had gotten a job with the J.D. Adams
Adams,
Manufacturing Company. They were competitors with Caterpillar. And so he was working at that place, and I was in an apartment, but I went to work. And I worked at a Navy avionics facility, which was right across the street from our apartment. And they built bomb sites and gun sites and other types of things. And I worked in their research lab.
I thought you weren't supposed to work.
Nevertheless, I did. I worked until time for Catherine to be born. I was probably 7 or 8 months pregnant when I left the job.
And you still lived in the apartment at that time?
Yeah. Actually, no, we left the apartment and we rented a little house.
Okay. I'm not familiar with the little house.
No, we weren't there terribly long. I think I know we moved there before you were born. Moving in that time was an experience because the road wasn't paved and it was muddy at that time. We could hardly even get through to get to our little house, and the house didn't have proper insulation, and it was not a wonderful house, but it was our first house.
Yeah. But you didn't live there very long, because then you got the house in Oxford, right?
We moved from there before you were born, because I remember specifically that the forsythia that was in front of our house on Oxford Street was in bloom when I went to the hospital when I was in labor, and we were having a heavy snowstorm when we brought you home.
Okay. So now we're up to 55.
Yeah.
You lived there for about 7 years, I guess. You moved out in 62. That's when Laterno Westinghouse bought out J.D. Adams.
Yes. And it became Webco.
Yeah, I think that was a little later, but yeah.
Yeah, it was a little later.
So then 61, I guess, somewhere in that area is where he started commuting to Peoria. ain't coming home on weekends.
Yes, yes.
Did you both there to go see the house to buy, to be built and buy, I guess?
We didn't build it.
No, but it wasn't.
It was being built.
It was being built.
I must have seen the house before we bought it, but I don't remember seeing it.
Okay. One of the things I remember about that house is that it didn't have the natural gas line hooked up when we moved in.
I don't think the street was paved either yet, was it?
Probably not.
It
The
was
sidewalks
gravel.
weren't in, yeah.
I know the sidewalks weren't in. I remember when they put those in. That was after Larry was born.
Yeah.
Larry was still riding a tricycle.
My tricycle tracks are still in that sidewalk.
Yes.
And along with Lucky's footprints.
Yes,
I remember the propane tank that was in the backyard.
yes.
from there.
Oh, yeah.
So, and then we were on the edge of town. We were on that farmer's field at
Yes.
the edge of our backyard.
Yes, you guys used to have a wonderful place to play back there.
Oh, we did a lot of exploring and stuff.
Every time we built a baseball field, then they would develop that section of the neighborhood and we'd have to move it to a different section.
And we moved to a lot of different ones.
That was a nice place to live.
Yeah, oh, it was a great place for us as kids to go exploring.
In the
Yes.
woods, yeah,
Yeah.
there was a lot of trails in the woods, a creek, Horsebone Cliff. Remember Horsebone Cliff?
I don't remember the name of the cliff. Which cliff are you talking about?
Back up along that creek.
Well, there was, as almost part of the subdivision, there was what we called Ward's Cliff. That was just a little thing, but then we followed that creek to where it joined another dry bed thing.
That was it,
And
there
then
was a
to the
cliff
left,
there.
there was a big cliff.
That was Horsebone.
Okay. Yeah, I'd wanted to go there again, but I haven't done
They
it.
developed that area.
Yeah, I saw that there was, but I wasn't sure if it got to there or not.
I'm
If it
not
did,
sure.
I was gonna see if I could find it. Cause that was a lot of memories. We did so much on that, along that creek and the woods and stuff, exploring. That's where I had my bee incident, also along that creek.
Yes, I remember that vividly.
Yeah, the Neiman's were in town visiting and I got attacked by bees.
Yeah, you were really hurting. They got inside your clothes.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I guess I got off track. Okay, so now you're not working, right, in Peoria?
For a
Only
long
fun.
time I wasn't.
Right, so that was when you did a lot of your,
I did a lot of volunteer work.
right.
And
then-
eventually I got an award for that.
Yes.
You worked for the symphony, right?
I
Well, that
worked
was
for the
later.
symphony and other groups. I don't even remember all of them, but once a year, I think it was the YWCA gave an award to the Woman of the Year, and I got that award one year. One of the things I remember about it is, and I was wearing a formal gown. It was a dress-up affair. They brought in a speaker. It wasn't who they had intended to bring. They had a substitution. So the one who came was Hermione Ginko. Anyway, the program ran long, and when they finally made the announcement of who was the winner, they interrupted the evening news to announce it on the evening news. And I got a telegram from Pat Nixon,
Oh,
That was called Coronet Lady, right?
coronet lady, and I had a little coronet that I could wear but never did.
yeah, that's like 68, I believe, or somewhere in that area is when you started working for this.
Yeah, it was right
symphony.
after I got that award that your dad said he wanted me to go to work. He said, if you don't go to work, I'll never respect you again. So I went out and
Don't work, do work, whatever. Don't work.
I got 2 part-time jobs. They were looking for an executive assistant for the symphony manager. So I
Oh.
applied for that and was hired on the spot.
Oh, I thought that was volunteer work. So the symphony job was paid.
Say Say that again?
I thought when you worked for the symphony, for some reason I thought that was volunteer
Well, I had done volunteer work before,
for the symphony.
yeah, but
Oh,
I
okay.
took a paid job. And then I was also asked to teach a course in technical writing at the community college at the same time. So I was doing those two part-time jobs.
So Dad went from my wife was never gonna work to if you don't work, I'm not gonna respect you.
Yes, yes.
And this is about the time that Jim went off to.
Interlocking?
Yes.
That was a little later. I don't know when that started. That would have been senior year of high school, so what
Right.
would that have been?
Like 69, I think.
It would've been
Yeah,
70s.
so that was
68,
about that
69.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yes,
I guess I always assumed that it was to earn money to help pay for some of
well, it's that, I remember that the recommendation for Interlaken came from the symphony manager that I was working for, so it was after I started working.
Do you remember his name? I can't remember it offhand.
I was thinking of it a minute ago, and at the moment it's gone.
Okay.
Shelley, Dr. Shelley.
Yeah.
He's the one that did that drawing that I have on the wall in the sewing room, the drawing of all the pipes. That was the way he doodled,
Oh,
and I thought it was so intricate and so interesting that I asked him for a copy of one of his, and I had it framed.
yeah. And during this time is when you started doing some of your local theater.
Yeah, I did.
Lakeview.
I took part in, I worked with, we had two theater groups. One was the Civic Theater and one was a summer theater. It was called Cornstalk, and it was in a tent.
Right.
And I was on the staff for some of the plays, but I had parts in two of them.
Another enjoyable experience.
It was. I made some really good friends.
I guess I
What were the
forget.
plays?
One was Dr. Cook's Garden, and the other one was, it was based on
Maine.
King Lear. It was,
Maine, you were in Maine, weren't you?
I was a secretary or something in Dr. Cook's Garden, and I don't remember what my role was in the other one.
I guess I forgot, we skipped over the TV that you made.
Oh,
color
yeah,
TV.
well, we
That was
wanted
like
a color
66
TV,
or
and
67.
so I got one of those kits, and I can't
Heathkit.
remember the name of the company. It was
Heathkit.
Heathkit,
Heathkit,
yeah.
Yes.
and it was a really good kit. I mean, it was step-by-step instructions.
And Dad built the cabinet.
Yes,
And also, there was a pop-up trailer. Didn't you sew the canvas for the
oh
trailer?
yeah, we made a pop-up trailer, and I sewed all the canvas and put the windows in and all that.
Yeah, that was pretty ingenious, little trailer.
It was. Your dad did a really good job planning that.
Yeah, well, basically it was half of a car frame for the base, and then he made the rest of it out of wood too.
Yeah.
And he would put it up against the wall in the garage when we weren't using it.
Yeah,
So you could still park two cars in there.
I remember one year we took it was a very hot summer, and we were looking for a cool place to go, and we went to Pennsylvania, to the mountains, and we were gonna try
that was
to,
cool.
and it got cold, and we went to Gettysburg to get warm.
I remember one time it rained at night and Dad was cooking eggs outside on the griddle and Wayne was sleeping in the top bunk and there was this water that had collected in the top of the canvas. So he pushed the water out and it went all over Dad.
Yeah, I remember that.
We had some wonderful vacations as a family.
Yeah, we did.
And didn't our cousin, Ron, go with us?
He
once or
did one
twice?
time. We went to Missouri. I remember we went down to Missouri and we set off some fireworks and we started a fire in a field.
Yeah, basically we went from Peoria to Florida, New York, Pennsylvania, out west to Washington, state of Washington, Oregon, California,
Not with a camper, but just driving.
vacations.
Yeah, we had a lovely vacation in California one time. We stayed in Santa Monica at a hotel that had a pool. It was beautiful weather there. It was really, really fun. We went to Carlsbad Caverns.
Yeah, that was the long day home,
Yeah, I remember that
Yes.
trip home.
without air conditioning and stuff.
We went all the way from somewhere in Texas or somewhere, all the way to Peoria or somewhere, or maybe in,
I thought it
New
was New
Mexico.
Mexico,
yeah, I think it might have been.
from New Mexico to Peoria in one day. It was a long drive.
Yeah, I don't remember which trip it was, but it was a very, very long trip.
Okay, so where are we at now? We got the jobs. You went back to school. So when did you
I
decide to go
went back to school in, I think it was 1975.
This is for a master's, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the year. Yeah. I don't know, it may have been earlier than that. I had found out that, well, after I had been doing the two jobs for a year, both of those places offered me full-time jobs. I was offered a full-time faculty position, and I was also offered the job of manager of the symphony. And I really was loving the teaching. I just really, so this had to have been about 1970 or 71, because I'd been working the two jobs for a year. And I loved the teaching, and I knew that if I was the manager of the symphony, I would be required to raise money. That was part of the job. And I didn't think I wanted to raise money, which is really ironic since I ended up years later having to raise money for the college.
So you were a professor at
Well,
Illinois Central College?
at that time they weren't at Illinois Central College. I don't think I was called a professor. I think you had to earn that. So I don't know what my title was, but I was teaching math and physics and technical writing. And then along the way they gave me other things to teach, like they asked me to teach Fortran. And that's kind of an interesting story too, because I said, sure, I'll learn Fortran so I can teach it. So I enrolled in a Fortran class there at the college, and I was sitting in the back of the classroom, and I was learning Fortran. And the faculty member who was teaching it had been offered a summer fellowship someplace, and he was supposed to get some elective surgery done. So he wanted to get that out of the way before summer so that he could have his fellowship. So he took a leave of absence, and they said, okay, Betty, you teach it. So one week I'm sitting in the back of the room learning it, and the next week I'm supposed to be standing up front teaching it. They don't do that in the community college anymore.
But you weren't always just a teacher at Illinois Central College, right?
Well, I was there for 7 years as a full-time faculty member, and that was when I decided to go back to school for my doctorate. That was shortly after your dad and I were divorced, and I was just feeling kind of at loss. And so I decided to go back for a doctorate. I already had the master's.
Master's was from
Bradley.
in Peoria.
Yes. And so I had a choice of getting a doctorate in English from Bradley or getting one in educational administration from Illinois State in Bloomington. And I thought I wanted to get the administration because by now, well, no, I was not an administrator at that time. When I was accepted into the program, I asked the dean there, will you accept me into the program if I never intend to be an administrator? And he said, oh yes. And so I went into the program, and before I finished the first course, they had asked me to be a department head, so I was in a job that was half administration, half teaching. And so from then on, I was always in administration at some level.
And so Bloomington was what, about 30 miles from
No, it was
Peoria?
more like 50.
50 miles from Peoria?
About 100-mile round trip.
So you were, I don't remember, were you staying there during the week or were you commuting every day?
There was only one time that I did that. I was commuting all the time until I took a sabbatical, and to take the sabbatical I had to be full-time student. I did that in the summer. So there was one summer that I had an apartment down there, and I would stay there for 5 days and come home on the weekend. I will tell you one thing that you probably have never heard before. When I went to Bradley, when I started in Bradley, I had to take a test beforehand to be admitted. That one was called the Miller's Analogies. And I took the test and I scored 92, which was in the 99th percentile, and they told me they had never seen that high a score before. And when I started into the doctoral program, I had to take the graduate record exam. And that's an exam that's split between math and verbal. It's a 1,600 point test, 800 for each section. And I scored 1,580. I missed something in the mathematics. And when I went to, after I'd been at Illinois State I was almost finished with my program, they told me they had never seen that high a score before. And I found out that my classmates all knew that, and they'd never told me that, which was embarrassing. It was embarrassing to know that other people knew it.
There are worse things to be embarrassed about. It never done well. So yeah, at one point you learned to fly, so you got your pilot's license.
Yeah, they got me started, I was always being asked to teach other things. They got me started teaching the private pilot ground school. And so I got interested in flying and took flying lessons and got my pilot's license, private pilot's license. I took you up one time. And after I got that, I started studying for the commercial. And I flew my parents to a family reunion in Wichita. We had let the family there know that I was flying in, and we told them what airport to go to pick us up. And they were sure I had made a mistake because that one didn't have commercial airliners. So they went to the commercial airport terminal, and of course we weren't there because they never expected that I was actually going to be flying the plane.
That was before the time of cell phones when you could call them and say, hey, you're at the wrong airport.
Yes.
Okay, so you've continued at Illinois Central College, and then decided to explore.
Well, the time came that the head of the division had the title of dean, I think, and he decided to retire. So they were looking for another person. So I applied, and I did a nationwide search, and one of my colleagues, who was the department head of one of the other departments, also applied. She was the head of the health department. I was the head of the mechanical and industrial department. And it turned out that the two of us were the finalists. And she got the job. And I decided that there was really no advancement for me there, that I should go and find something else. So I started applying elsewhere.
During your time at ICC, the school grew quite a bit, right?
Oh yeah, we built an addition onto our building where I was. And people would call it Betty's addition because it was mostly the programs that I was in charge of that were going into that. So, yeah, it grew a lot.
Yeah. Well, they added that one building, and then the gymnasium, I think, was added during that period of time too.
It started, when I started there, they were in temporary buildings. And when we went to look at it recently, at least one of those is still there.
Yeah. So then you started looking elsewhere.
I did. I applied elsewhere. I'm trying to think what I was looking for. I know I wouldn't consider anything that was an assistant job, like president's assistant or anything like that. The one that I applied for was the head of instruction. It wasn't called dean at that time. Maybe director. Anyway, it was in charge of all of the instruction. It was the equivalent of a provost at a university, a person who's in charge of all the faculty and all the instruction. And so I think that's what I was looking for. And when I applied to Ivy Tech, there were two different positions that were considering me. One was the head of instruction at the Lafayette campus, and the other was a job in the central office. And I really thought I was more interested in the one in the central office because I would be dealing with all of the campuses throughout the state. And I'm glad I didn't take that one, or they never finalized an offer to me, because that one would have been more of a staff position and mine was a line position where I really was in charge of everything.
Well, Ivy Tech and Illinois Central College were sort of different.
Oh, they were very different. Ivy Tech, when it was founded, it was always called Indiana Vocational Technical College, but they viewed it as something less than college. And they had a state board of trustees, and there were people on that board who wanted to close the college. They opposed it. So it had a really rocky time, and I think I told you the other day, they wouldn't let the college teach general education because these people are just being trained for jobs, and they don't need to know English or psychology or any of those stupid things.
Right, it was more technical, welding and that type of trade.
It did have health programs, which are pretty high level, but it wasn't well regarded.
But over the years, that's changed completely.
Well, they were working on it at that time, and that's when they were working on the transfer of credits.
And all told, I don't remember what year you started at Ivy Tech.
I started there in 69.
No,
69 is when I started part-time.
not at Ivy Tech.
Oh, you're right. 84.
84, okay. And once again, you have oversaw a great transformation of the school.
Well, when I went there, when I started at Ivy Tech, our enrollment at that campus was 1,800. When I retired, it was over 10,000.
Yeah, that's an, unbelievable growth of it.
I would take responsibility for a lot of changes that we made, in bringing in better qualified faculty. I was one of the leaders in getting our credits transferable to universities and raising money and some of the new programs that we started in. We were the first ones to start a program in computer-aided design. I came up here to a conference and saw what was going on in computer-aided design, and I went back and said, we need to get into this. And we got a $250,000 grant from one of the software companies, I can't remember the name now. And I got started in that field.
Yeah, I started CAD drawing back in '78 at Caterpillar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was something that was growing at that time.
And the same thing with robotics. I was the one that got us into robotics.
That's another area that grew quite a bit
Yeah.
during that period of time.
Yeah. So the college became recognized, actually throughout the state it became better recognized, but I will with no attempt at modesty say that I was one of the leaders in that.
So, you decided to retire at age 75. What was the drive? I've done this a long time.
By the time I was 75, I was just getting tired.
I know that feeling. I'm not 75. But then you've gotten involved in a lot of other things since then. The League of Women's Voters.
Well, I still continued to be involved in community activities as a dean at the college, because, and then as the chancellor, especially as the chancellor, it was really my responsibility to represent the college in the community. And because the college had such a poor reputation in terms of anything other than teaching the manual skills, I wanted to be seen as, and wanted us to be seen as more than that.
Yeah, obviously that did a lot for the school. So.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the process that you engaged in that ended up having a new campus in Lafayette.
Well, when I first moved to Ivy Tech in Lafayette, we had 29 acres that were leased on a 99-year lease. And on that space, there was a building that was built as a sanitarium in 1929, same year I was born, which was our office building. And we ran some classes in there. And there was a building that we had built that was an $8 million building that held some of the technology, the drafting and welding and machine tool and that sort of thing. And we had rented a building in another location that was a cheap, I forget what they call them, just a utilitarian building that had a program in diesel mechanics and refrigeration and air conditioning. And we also had a building that was an old high school that had all of our business and general education and such. So they were scattered all over town. And it was, sometimes it would take you 20 minutes to get from the main campus to the downtown building. Sometimes it would take you 40 minutes because there were railroad tracks that you had to cross that sometimes were blocked. So I had been there 4 months, and my boss went on like vacation. He hadn't been on vacation for years. And so I was in charge. At that time, I was the head of the education, the equivalent of a provost, although they didn't use that term. And he went on vacation and I was in charge. And while he was gone, the county attorney and one of the county commissioners came to visit me and said, we're going to put a highway through right here, through the middle of what we had rented, the 29 acres. And we want you to sign off on it. And I said, no, I can't do that. And refused to sign off. And so I called the president's office and said, I need to talk to the president. Because, you know, we were one system statewide and we were headed by a president with a chancellor in charge of each college. So then when I refused, we had to go into negotiations. And when my boss got back, I sort of was in charge most of the time, because after he got back from his vacation, he was called to fill in for a chancellor in another college in the system, and I was in charge again. And that went on for 2 or 3 years. You were there for a lot of that. And so I was the one who had to do all that negotiation to get it done. Eventually, someone I knew donated us 80 acres of farmland adjacent to what was left of our 29 acres. We had not given up the land yet. And there was a very long negotiation that went on. And eventually we got the title to the half of the 29 acres that was left after they negotiated all this. They took the other half on the other side of what was going to be a 4-lane road. And we got the 80 acres donated to us. So we ended up with a lot more land than we had started with. And we now owned the buildings that were on the rented land. But we still had the buildings in downtown Lafayette and the little, I forget what they call those, anyway, the little tin shack. So we were still split all over the city. It was still commuting from one place to another. There was one time that we always had an orientation for new students in the fall. And sometimes we would have it downtown and sometimes we would have it on what we called the main campus where the administration building was. There was one time I was in the middle of a meeting with my cabinet, which was all of the head directors, the deans and such. And somebody said something that really ticked me off and I got mad and I said, I'm leaving, I'm going to orientation. And I got in my car and I drove from the main campus to the downtown campus. And when I got there, somebody met me in the parking lot and said, the orientation's on the other campus. So I had to go back. Anyway, we went through many more years of negotiation trying to get funding to build a permanent building on what was now our main campus, where we now had about almost 100 acres. And that went on. We had a 20-year lease on the building downtown. I think we had probably 10 years left. And I thought, well, we've got to do something. There was no way, I guess it didn't have an ending date, because we had no way to get out of that lease. So I had to negotiate with them, I guess it was the city, to be able to leave that, to break that lease. And I thought we would need it within about 10 years, and it took us must have been a 20-year lease. Anyway, it took us until the end of the lease before we got that negotiated. It took at least 10 years for us to get the money to build the main campus. So then we built the big campus building, the classrooms and student services and all of that. And we also made a negotiation with the county to have a joint library that was county library, college library, that was on our campus. So now we have the technology building, the administration building, the library building, and the main campus classroom building. Later on, we negotiated with the unions to let them have a building that they built on our land with a lease on the land that was union training, and that was for the electricians and the carpenters. So that gave us 5 buildings on our land, and that was the way it was on that campus when I left there. By the time I left, we had another campus in another city, one of the outlying communities where we had classes, and they now have 2 of those in 2 other cities in the surrounding counties. We served 8 counties altogether. Our county was Tippecanoe County. You will think of Tippecanoe and Tyler too. And then there were 7 surrounding contiguous counties that we served.
Talk about how you started raising funds in the local area, which was unprecedented.
Well, the college had never been into fundraising. And there came a time that they thought that they should try to raise funds. So they put out a mandate to all of the colleges that we were to raise, I don't know, $100,000 or something. And it was to be for scholarships. So we did that, and we raised the money through local contacts and donations. But we needed money to supplement what we got from the state for the new campus we were building. Just got a frog in my throat. So I talked to one of the main fundraisers in town, and I said, do you think we could raise $1 million? And he said, yeah, I think so. And none of the campuses had ever done that, anything like that. None of them had ever gone out and tried to raise money without that one mandate from the central office. So we decided we would try to do that. We asked permission. We had to go through both our local board and the state board to get permission to do it. And we hired a professional fundraiser to come in as a consultant for us. We needed to find some community leader who would be willing to say that he was the head of it. He didn't have to do much, he just had to lend his name and his reputation. And I asked the CEO of Eli Lilly, and he said no to me. And then the professional fundraiser went and talked to him, and he said yes. So he headed it up, and we had a group of community leaders who met periodically to discuss community ventures, and they backed us. And to make a long story short, we ended up raising about $2.5 million. And we could use that money then for things like additional computers and decorations for the walls. And that was when we decided that instead of putting up posters and things like that, we would solicit slides from Indiana artists of their work, and we would select artistic things from Indiana artists. And we had a committee that did that. They used black and white beans, and they would look at the slides of their work, and they would put in a white bean if they wanted this one, and a black bean if they didn't want it. And we selected works, and we decorated it with original art, because we thought that students need to be exposed to the arts as well as to technology. And Ivy Tech was founded to originally not even have the liberal arts courses. They didn't think that students needed to know history and psychology and I think even English. We weren't allowed to have a course that was called speech. We could have a course that said communications, but we couldn't have speech. Even math was limited, so we're trying to broaden the horizons. So we got this original art, and now that campus is known for its display of original art. They're still collecting it, and we get donations all the time. They get donations all the time of original art for the campus. We again were the first who ever to do that. Other campuses now have followed our example, but we were leaders in that. That's a long answer to your original question.
That was exactly what I hoped to hear.
You had a troubling history with Vincennes.
Yes. This was when we were still struggling to get established. We had not been yet recognized as a community college, but we were teaching everything, and we'd worked out, when I went there, our credits would not transfer to any of the Indiana schools. And so a student who wanted to go on for a bachelor's degree after they got their associate from us was not allowed to count any of their credits to the Indiana universities. The legislature started looking into that, and they found, I think, 4 students who had been able to transfer their credits. And the way they did it was they transferred their credits to an Illinois university and then transferred back. And then the Indiana universities accepted them. So we started a negotiation. We were told to do this individually, but throughout the state, all of the colleges were to do that. We were to get at least 10 courses that were transferable. And we worked with Purdue University, and they accepted all of our general education courses. Again, we were the first to accomplish that. Not all of them would transfer for everything, for instance. Our math didn't necessarily transfer to an engineering math, but it would transfer into some math. So everything transferred.
But there was Vincennes that came in and there was
Oh,
a
yes.
merger or whatever.
At some point, and I don't even know what prompted this, but our president and some of the higher, Vincennes University was a 2-year college, called itself a university, but it was a 2-year residential college, small, and it was failing. It was having declining enrollments, and it was having financial problems. Ivy Tech was doing well. We were growing. We were living within our budget. So they decided we should merge. And they declared that Vincennes would take over all of the general education courses from us, and we would teach the technical courses, and they would get the revenue for the courses that they taught. In Indiana, here, there's 3 sources of funding for the community colleges. There's a county tax, there's local tuition, and there's state funding. In Indiana, it was all state funding, and it was in Illinois, the funding level varies by the type of course. So health courses, which are the most expensive, get a higher level of state reimbursement than English, which is much less expensive to offer. Well, they arranged that Vincennes would get, in Indiana, they all get reimbursed at the same rate. They arranged that all of the low cost courses, all of the gen ed, would be taught by Vincennes, and they would get all that money, and we would teach all of the expensive ones and get that money. So we're losing money, and Vincennes is getting money, and this is supposed to be a wonderful partnership. They chose 4 campuses to be pilots for this. We had 14 different colleges. They chose us to be one of them. I didn't want to do it. I think this is very unfair. There's no reason to do it. The reason we agreed to do it was that the gen ed faculty, the people who had the most to lose, came to me and said, if it's gonna be done, we want to be the start of it so that we can see that it's done right. So we did it. It was miserable. For instance, I signed up for a Spanish class. Didn't tell anybody who I was. I just signed up because I thought I needed to learn Spanish. And the Vincennes professor was teaching it. And he came in and he said that they have us teaching because we have master's degrees and we're much better qualified. And I said, I don't agree. He said, you don't agree that a master's is important? I said, I don't agree that we don't have people with master's degrees. Found out later, he didn't have a master's degree in Spanish. He had a master's degree in history. So we fought through that battle, and eventually they broke up the partnership and we got our courses back, but that was...
How'd you get them to give in on it?
I'm not really sure. It never worked out well.
So Vincennes went back to being separate? And
Well, they made a deal with Vincennes that they could start offering some 4-year courses. so that they could sort of transition into actually being a university. They had one interesting program. They had an aviation program. They were one of, actually, maybe the only two-year college that had an aviation program. They trained pilots.
Is it still in existence, Vincennes University?
Yeah.
They're doing okay, or?
Well, as far as I know, I haven't kept up to date with what's happening there.
Illinois Central College taught pilots. I took a class.
Well, we taught the ground school,
Yeah.
but they had an airport.
Oh, they actually flight
Yeah.
instruction.
Yeah.